Hello, everyone, and welcome. There you go. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I believe that I am streaming. I believe I'm live. I never seem to get this right the first time, do I? But we are live. And welcome to Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 3, Holy Ghost. And my goodness, was this a hell of an episode. Definitely my favorite this season so far. And it has opened up so many crazy possibilities for where this show can go, and I really hope it goes there. As far as almost being sort of an anthology series of every week dealing with different type of paranormal activities or situations. It took me for a loop. It wasn't what I was expecting. I thought that that house in the first two episodes, or actually just the last episode, was going to be very, very integral to the plot of this series. But apparently it isn't. Although at the end of the episode, we see that we're not done with that story yet, which I imagine would be the case. But I love this. Oh my God, did I love this! And it's a deep episode, okay? It's a very deep episode, and it begins with this black screen that says in the summer of 1955, 10 Negroes moved to the north side of Chicago, and they disappeared, never to be heard from again. And what is the importance of this date, 1955? So we're going to get into a little bit of that before we get into the episode. What you can see here is Lita buys a house. And the moment you see this house, you're like, oh my God, this is not the house you want to be living in. Look at that, right? But I like this about the show, that it's a bit tongue-in-cheek and it's a little bit pulpy and it's aware of itself. And I'm going to get into that too in just a bit because I want to respond to a review of the show that I saw. It was a YouTube video that somebody posted, and it was so crappy, this review. And I wonder if this person actually even watched the show, or maybe they did, but they weren't paying attention to what some of the themes of the show were. In fact, now that I'm in the groove, because I totally forgot that I wanted to do this. That's the honest truth. And so, as long as I'm here, let's just say, guys, if you're watching Lovecraft Country because you think this is going to be a show either about H.P. Lovecraft or an adaptation of any of his work or anything like that, you're in the wrong show. Like, you gotta go find something else to watch. This show is not about that. Okay? One of the criticisms that the guy made is, oh, well, if H.P. Lovecraft was so racist, which they made it very clear on the show that he was, then why are black people making a show about him? Guys, the whole point is the fact that he was racist, in that there was a lack of black people in these sort of genres, fantasy, horror, sci-fi, etc., for many years. And this show is sort of a way of criticizing that, but in a very smart way, because it actually puts these characters in a 1950s setting. Imagine if we had had black shows in the 1950s, or shows with blacks that allowed them to just be themselves, be in horror, be in a sci-fi, fantasy, whatever genre, and actually just be themselves without being stereotyped as they usually were. Imagine that. That's what this show is trying to do stylistically. And it's also kind of drawing that line between the fantastical monsters and the real monsters, which were the racists. Oh, but why is every white person in this show mega racist? Well, a lot of it is for dramatic reasons. I'm sure not every white person in America was racist in the 1950s. I doubt it, because otherwise we wouldn't have moved past some of the things that we've moved past since the 1950s, even though there's still some way to go. But guess what? it's the show's way of, again, wink and a nod. In the 1950s, you watch those shows from the 1950s, movies, up through to the 60s, 80s. In the 90s, it started to get a little bit better, and blacks were always stereotyped as whatever, either from the ghetto, or they had magical powers, or they would die first in a story, whatever. But here it's reversing the roles. Now imagine a show set in the 1950s with blacks, and now all the whites are stereotyped as a bunch of racist idiots, right? Are you starting to get what this show is trying to do? So don't be offended by it. Enjoy it. It's a fantasy and it's pulpy. And it's not just about Lovecraft. It's about this representation in all of these different fictions, types of fiction, including sci-fi, including fantasy. So we have elements of all that in this series. That's what makes it interesting, because we really didn't have that. Whoopi Goldberg has this great hater or lover. She does make a great point about when she was a little girl, and her parents would let her stay up to watch Star Trek because, hey, look, there's blacks in the future, because you watch almost any, or maybe any, you could just say any sci-fi from before Star Trek, and blacks just didn't exist in the future until Uhura showed up on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And that was a monumental achievement. And Martin Luther King was her biggest fan. Watch that YouTube video with Nichelle Nichols talking about who her biggest fan was. That's a beautiful story in how Martin Luther King made her stay on that show when she was ready to quit. So that's what this show is dealing with. And don't get butthurt about it. If you're white, don't get butthurt about it. There was bad things that happened to black people in the past. This is not trying to say, oh, we're all victims and life is still miserable now and we should burn it all down. This show is not making these sort of statements. It's saying, look, this is a reality of what happened. We're looking at it from a different lens, like this episode did. Right now, we're going to get into a little bit of history in a second. So this show definitely looked at the summer of 1955. 1955 is an important year. Um, and it's given it through a different lens, which is of horror, of terror, a little bit of a Tales from the Hood-ish feel as far as a morality tale at the end with this house, which is very haunted. So I just wanted to put that out there. I thought this guy's video was terrible. I mean, put a post up on a Lovecraft Country fan group where I went bit by bit by bit by bit and answered every question that he had. I don't know if he was really paying attention to the show. It's become kind of cool these days to just say that everything is trying to be woke and social justicey just because there's black people or a woman, or maybe they changed the character to there was a man, now it's a woman, or she was white, now she's black. So, oh no, man, not, I mean, just because this happens, it doesn't mean anything. You got to watch the product, you got to watch the show or the movie and judge for yourself. Like, I know there was a little bit of that about, I think it was the character Domino. I'm not a big fan of Deadpool, but I think she was played by this black lady. And guess what? Who complained after that movie came out? Because she was great. I think I watched that one. That was Deadpool 2. I liked it a little bit more than the first one. She was great. Who's complaining about Nick Fury being played by Samuel L. Jackson? Because he's great. So sometimes this stuff just happens because, hey, this is a great actor. Or we just want to see it from a different point of view, right? And just because this show, it has a majority, not majority, it's basically an all black cast, right? Um, and it's about black people and it's about racism. Stop being butthurt about it, okay? It happens. Racism happened a lot in the Jim Crow era, intense, as we're about to see, because 1955, we had this, the beginning of the show talked about how these black people were trying to move into the north side of Chicago. And here we have a bit from a book and resistance in the urban north about how in 1953 nearly 50 white teenagers bombarded Donald Howard's apartment with racial epithets, stones, and paving bricks. By August 9, crowds of between 1 and 2,000 were congregating around the dwelling in the Thumble Park homes, a project of the Chicago Housing Authority, harassing the Howard family and damaging the structure with missiles of every description. It was the culmination of a week of uncertainty and the opening of seemingly endless struggle between the South daring communities surrounding the public housing project and the CHA. The uncertainty stemmed from the fact that Betsy Howard, an exceptionally fair skinned African American, had made the application for the unit at 10630 Bensley Avenue. Although the Howards had moved into the project on July 30th, it was not until August 4th that the manager of the Thumble Park Homes telephoned the Chicago Commission on Human Relations with information that the family might be Negro, etc., etc. July 30th to August 4th, so very short period of time, kind of reminiscent of this episode, right? So this episode dealt with this resistance to blacks moving into white neighborhoods. This is something that went on, continued to go on for a long period, still goes on now. We see the gentrification that's happening right now, right, in a lot of major cities. So this racial segregation still goes on today. Obviously, back in that day, it was much more dangerous. Okay, like crosses burning in your front yard type dangerous, but it still happens to this day. So this episode dealt with that in a very smart way, with them moving into this house and what it all the ghosts that it would bring up. But also 1955, guys. This is Emmett Till. Okay, and well, I should have warned you, kind of graphic pictures here, but the show was kind of graphic today. But in 1955, two white men brutally murdered African American teenager Emmett Till for reportedly flirting with a white woman in the town of Money, Mississippi. Interesting that the last scene of the show, our friend Christina comes back and Atticus is almost about to kill her, shoot her. She's like, you gotta do better. You gotta be smarter. You can't go around shooting white women. We'll get to that at the end. And Till's mother, Mammy, held an open casket funeral so that the world could see the violence that murderous racists had inflicted on her son's body. The funeral drew over 100,000 mourners. And if I'm not mistaken, give me a second here. I gotta look it up. But didn't it was just the anniversary of it. Just a few days ago, wasn't it? Let me double check. So it was very telling. August 28th. Yeah, August 28th, 1955. So this show came out, this episode, I should say, timely. 1955. Terrible year. I mean, of many, right? So there is our the body of Emmett after the beating. So you kind of get what the show is trying to do, right? Lovecraft Country. It's giving you the real horror, the fantastical horror, which is not just Lovecraftian, although obviously his is going to be the overriding one because we're still dealing with these people over in Lovecraft Country, but it's dealing with pop culture as a whole. And I do have a recommendation for you. Watch a documentary called Horror Noir. Okay, it's on Shudder, and it talks about all of the history of blacks in horror films, and you'll get a sense for where this what the show is trying to do. And I guess what the book tried to do. I never read the book, but I'm going to be looking for it. So let's get to it. Like I said, she bought this house, and this house is definitely haunted. um, and guys, I just really enjoyed the the episodic nature of this episode, in the sense that um, I get a little tired of the season long arcs. I know that's how TV is done today. We got to have the season long arcs and you can't miss an episode. But this feels like a standalone episode. I mean, if you can just tell somebody, look, their uncle died the last episode due to some crazy, magic, crazy stuff happened, paranormal stuff happened, and their uncle is dead. And that's pretty much the only information you need to have in order to understand what's going on this episode. She's got a sister. I mean, we met her the first episode, but we haven't had much interaction. So okay, she's got a sister, and her, Atticus, and Montrose the father are just a little like they're back from their adventure. It's been 3 weeks. I guess that's all the information you really need in order to understand this episode. And then after that, it's just really episodic. It's just them dealing with what's going on in this house. We find out Lita got some money. I don't want to spoil everything. So you find out where she really got this money. She said she had won the lottery, but then we find out it was actually something else. And then at the end, we find out it was actually something else. So I don't want to spoil everything in case you haven't watched the episode, but if you do want to comment below about anything I don't mention, go ahead. Yeah, so this house is definitely haunted, and Lita is the one that finds out. Regardless, she decides to have a party, and she gets some Atticus dick, and she needed it by her own admission later, because she died and came back. She wasn't feeling herself. But I'm glad that they're not gonna let this simmer. It's obvious these two are into each other, and Atticus is a good-looking man. We got to see some more Atticus as this episode, so that's always a plus. And I like to see that these two bonding and doing what they got to do because they got real good chemistry, and she's awesome. And this was her episode. This was 100% Alita episode, which is cool because I want to get to know more about her character. There's still a lot of mystery about her, what she was doing when she was away from Chicago. I'm still not sure. So I want to get. She seems like she has layers, and she hides those layers by way of her bravado. But when she needs to let that bravado go out, she lets that bravado go out, as we can see here. Because as soon as they moved into this neighborhood, the white folks weren't having it, and they burned a cross in front of their house during the party. And for like the whole week, they had left these cars out there with like some on the horns of the car, and she had it, so she grabbed the bat and just smashed up the windows, knocked the bricks out that were tied to the steering wheel, and had that and honking the horn. And that was one of the best scenes of the episode, although there were a lot of really good scenes. Some things were a bit unexplained, like Hippolyta. We'll get into Hippolyta in a little bit towards the end. But in the house, she went into this room that had these globes, and it was like this mystery room, and it just cut. The scene cut, and it didn't explain what happened in there, right? Because she was looking for her daughter, who was out playing Ouija board with the other kids, and then when the well, now I can't remember if it was before or after. I think it was before, because she was like, "Oh, where's Dee? Where's the daughter?" And when she went to look for her, she went upstairs. She went into this room, and then she saw all this stuff in there, and then it just cut. So I wish it would have explained a little bit more of what was going on there. But this scene was awesome. This scene was awesome. I loved it. And like I said, this was her episode. This is after she gets locked up for doing what she did. Although that was kind of weird too. I didn't exactly understand what went down there because the cops definitely took her in. But then when we see her again, she is just out of jail. She's in her little dark room because she's a photographer, which is in the basement, which is where she first realized, or she first started hearing noises and thinking there's somebody in the house. And then when she starts developing her photos, she sees all the ghosts in the photos, right? And that's when Lita just starts to connect the dots, and then she finds a whole bunch of newspaper clippings, and she starts to realize, hey, this house is haunted. And what is the haunting is that apparently there was this doctor, the scientist, who was doing experiments on humans, and there were these black folks that went missing. So a little nod to Get Out, maybe. Jordan Peele is a part of this, and he would do experiments on them. And again, this goes into more Black history, in case you don't know, that black men were experimented on. They were injected with syphilis. It's the Tuskegee syphilis study, okay? And it happened between 1932 and 1972. And these black men were told that they were getting this vaccine or something, and that all their medical bills would be paid for, whatever. They were just getting paid to be part of this medical study, but they were injecting them with syphilis so they could study the long term effects of syphilis. And then eventually this came to light and it was stopped in 1972, but a lot of these men just lost their lives due to this. And so this, again, it goes into this idea of black bodies being used, way back from slavery until even in the present day, how black bodies are used for their athleticism, right? Um, and that's a whole nother issue. Maybe we can talk about that on another episode, or if if they touch on it. But how blacks are admired for their athleticism, not so much for their brains. But this is slowly changing, I guess, in popular culture. Let's hope. So and also in some black exploitation movies, there were movies like that where they would have a doctor trying to create a black Frankenstein and experimenting on black bodies. So this is a really touchy subject, but cool that they brought that in. So this show is like hitting it's telling our history, but it's doing it in the most interesting and well conceived way without going back to the butthurt review that I heard, without it being social justice warring, warring, if you get what I'm saying, with ing at the end. um, Without it being like, oh, victim us, victim us. No, nobody's a victim in this show at all. And I say that because I'm not a fan of that stuff. I really am not. I'm not a fan of all like the people that are just offended by everything and all the SJWs of the world. I'm just not a fan of that. So and you can kind of smell it from a mile away when a show is like that, when it's just pandering to this type of audience without actually concerning itself with the characters and the story. This show is not. But it shows some ugly truths too, so deal with it. So once they find out the house is haunted, this is such a great scene here, guys. And by the way, I got slides up in case you're not watching the screen. I got slides up, so I'm getting a little better, right? Every every episode, and I think I'm gonna come in under 30 minutes, which is good because I want to make these a little bit shorter. And so they call in the spiritual woman, the priestess, and um, she's gonna try to ward off these evil spirits in the house. She brings a goat to the house. It's a really funny scene, man. Real tongue in cheek too, and that's like a trope in a lot of movies that stereotype black women as these magical Negroes, they call them, right? So I think that was a wink and a nod to that, and she was a bit over the top. Kind of felt like a scene out of Poltergeist, and they get together in a circle. They have the blood of the goat on their head, and they're calling out and chanting for these spirits to leave the house. But then the spirit gets into her body, gets in. But Lita, she's a badass, and she's not gonna back down. and she tells these ghosts that you're not dead yet, and you have the chance to fight the ghost of this doctor, which I don't think I understood exactly how he died in this house. That wasn't very well explained, or maybe if it was, I missed it. But he's there, and these ghosts are able to get rid of him. It was a really beautiful scene, because they were all deformed. There was even a baby there, like a baby's head on a grown man's body. It was very well done, very gory. And then eventually they start forming into themselves, into their real selves, and they can have some rest, which is really cool because that's what I expected. Like when I was watching this episode, I was like, man, that's where I was like, kind of Tales from the Hoodish, like morality tale. Like somehow these spirits got to find rest, and they're going to be able to find rest through some intervention of Lita and Atticus, because these black ghosts have no reason to be haunting other black people. So, why would they do that? Unlike Candyman, right? No, they need to be out haunting some white folks that did this to them. But how exactly would they come up to this conclusion? Lita just let them know, like, you're not dead. And then they all transformed into themselves and were at rest. It was really beautiful and reminded me even a little bit of Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. Like these ghosts just needed to play that last game, right, of baseball. These ghosts just needed their rest somehow. Very, very beautiful, touching scene. And while this is happening, three white guys break into the house, and that gets very gory, as a side note. So I do love that they don't shy away from the gore in this show at all. And finally, I do want to talk about Hippolyta and our friend. Oh God, I said his name already, and I completely forgot now. And this is the bad thing because they're not really exploring these characters. I want to know what is going on with the dad, Montrose, and Hippolyta. I liked her so much right from the beginning, from the first episode. And then I was so happy when I saw in some of the previews that she would be part of this show for, the whole season. She's part of the main cast, in fact, if you go onto the wiki page. So I want to see what else they got going for her, okay? Because she seems like a really interesting character. You see that she's picked up where her husband left off as far as doing the Blue Book, which I guess is their version of the Green Book, places that are safe for black people to travel as they go around the country. And of course, I mean, you can't just sidetrack to this story of her doing that because that would be kind of a boring story. Although maybe she could be part of, something paranormal could happen to her on one of these trips. But I just wish they would break that down a little bit more. I love Dee, the little girl. She's so cute. Has a lot of screen charisma. So I'd like to see more about them. They showed that she was grieving, but this show so far hasn't done a really good job at grieving, at people um, feeling like the after effects of something happening. Like, okay, episode 2, it was the spell. That's why they forgot that they were attacked by monsters. But in episode 1, remember, they were chased out of this town by a bunch of gun wielding racists. And then they were just kind of laughing about it after. I was like, whoa, man, that was like intense. I don't know if I would be laughing about it. So the show hasn't done that good of a job at that. And I get that it's trying to be very pulpy, very pop. It doesn't want to dig deep on purpose, I believe, because that's just the style that it's trying to play. It's supposed to be like representing that type of literature, that pulp fiction, as it was called, right? So makes sense, but sometimes it feels uneven, okay? Because these characters don't have much to do at the moment, and yet they're getting screen time. Although at the end, she does kind of question. She's wondering, did my husband really die how they said they died? Because they all lied to her about how he died. They said that the sheriff, remember the sheriff from episode 2, he shot them. And I feel the same way about Montrose. there's a lot going on in this character. We just not seeing it yet. Yeah, I guess they're building up to it. I hope they do build up to it because he's a great actor. Michael K. Williams. He was from The Wire, right? And I didn't realize until my friend told me that he was. I think it was Omar from The Wire, and um, and he was gay. Yeah, he was he was the gay gangster in Baltimore in The Wire. Great series. Not my favorite series ever, but it was pretty good. Although I stopped watching it, so how good was it, right? But I know people love that series. It just wasn't like. Anyway, I don't want to talk about The Wire, but I was like, oh, that's where I remember his face from. And then somebody brought up an interesting theory in the HBO Lovecraft group about the fact that perhaps the father is gay. And that's the thing that they don't want to talk about. And that maybe Uncle George is Atticus's real dad. Oh my God. And that would make sense in that when he was looking for his dad in that bar, there was that guy getting a blowjob, which I was like, what? Like, nothing against it, but I was like, what? Like, why did they have to show that right there? So maybe that's a gay bar or, gays around that area. I don't know. The dad did, they did talk about the dad, Montrose and George were talking about how he got beat by his dad, but their father when he was little for painting or drawing the baseball players. So maybe he's got some gay in him that uh, has been kind of stuffed down, which is why he drinks. And maybe he couldn't do it. He couldn't finish the deed. And the George did it for him. And that would make sense why George had that dream or that vision of that ex-wife in that second episode. Maybe that was Montrose's woman. I don't know, guys. Interesting, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. But I just want to see more of their characters. Her especially. I really like her. And Montrose, I think it's coming, but it's not there yet. And then at the very, very end, we got a little bit of Christine back. Is it Christine or Christina? Let me get that right. It's Christina, okay? Christina Braithwaite. So, yeah, she's definitely still alive. So that answers a bit of whether the whole house was destroyed or everybody in the house was destroyed or just her. Because it seemed like it was just that room that was destroyed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't feel like the whole house was destroyed. It was whoever was in that room where they were doing the ceremony. And although they left the house, I figured they weren't just gonna leave that plot line loose. So I'm glad that they showed that she's still there. But it's cool that they're not making it like this season long arc because I think that would be kind of boring. I did read that the book is quite episodic, so perhaps that's gonna work to the show's favor because every chapter maybe is a different little adventure, almost written like a TV show. So that's cool. I can dig it. I can dig it. I can dig a show that's gonna give me X-Files Monster of the Week with the overarching mythology on top of that. I just hope the mythology doesn't get as convoluted as the X-Files mythology got after a while. Um, but it seems like they know where they're going. Obviously, there's a book that's finished, so at the very least, they got an ending. The danger comes when they get past the source material, right? That's where the danger always lies. But so far, so good. Really enjoyed this episode. My favorite. I've given I think an 8.5, 8.1 to other episodes. This one I give a 9, maybe a 9.2, okay? Really cool episode. Really enjoyed it. Loved all the historical references. And that's it, guys. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, which I should have said at the beginning, but there's a little flashy thing right there. And I will have more Lovecraft Country next week. And on Thursdays, I'll have my Star Trek Lower Decks. And tomorrow, what we're watching, and I'll be talking about Bill and Ted's new movie, Bill and Ted Face the Music. And my friend Pete will be talking about some Brian De Palma movies and Shakespeare movies. And, we just talk about what we've seen new